Strange tales, yet mirrors of human life. Hey everyone! Welcome to Encountering Chinese, Strange Tales from Zhai. Today, I'm going to bring you a story called Dreaming of Wolves. Elder Bai was a native of Zhili. His eldest son, Bai Jia, had been serving in the south for 3 years without any news. One day, a distant relative named Ding came to visit Elder Bai's home. Elder Bai, being hospitable, welcomed him warmly. Ding often claimed to have connections with spirits and even boasted about working as a ghost envoy in the underworld. During their conversation, Elder Bai asked him about the netherworld, but Ding's answers were absurd and far-fetched. Elder Bai found his words hard to believe, but he simply chuckled and said nothing more. A few days later, while Elder Bai was lying in bed, Ding suddenly came to visit again and invited him out for a stroll. Elder Bai, thinking nothing of it, followed Ding out the door. They entered a city and walked for a while until Ding pointed to a large gate and said, "This is your nephew's residence." Elder Bai was startled. He knew that his sister's son was currently serving as a county magistrate in Shaanxi, a place far from here. Shocked, he asked, "How could my nephew be here?" Ding smiled and said, "If you don't believe me, go in and see for yourself." So Elder Bai stepped inside. Sure enough, he saw his nephew seated in the hall, dressed in official robes and wearing an official's hat. His attendants stood neatly in place on either side, yet strangely, none of them acknowledged Elder Bai's presence, as if they couldn't see him at all. Ding then pulled Elder Bai outside again and said, "Your son Bai Jia's office isn't far from here either. Would you like to visit?" Elder Bai agreed. Before long, they arrived at another grand residence. Ding motioned for Elder Bai to enter, but as Elder Bai peered inside, he saw a massive wolf lying across the entrance, blocking the way. Fear gripped him, and he hesitated to step forward. Ding urged him, "Go on in." They passed through the gates and approached the main hall. Elder Bai was horrified to find wolves everywhere, some sitting, some lying down, scattered all over the place. On the steps, piles of white bones were stacked high, creating a gruesome sight. Elder Bai's heart pounded, and his legs began to tremble uncontrollably. Ding shielded him with his body and guided him forward. Just then, Bai Jia emerged from within. Seeing his father and Ding, he was delighted and invited them to sit down for a chat. He then ordered his servants to prepare a banquet. Suddenly, a large wolf dragged in a dead body. Terrified, Elder Bai leaped to his feet and cried out, "What is the meaning of this?" Bai Jia replied nonchalantly, "It's for the meal, of course." Elder Bai immediately tried to stop him, panic rising in his chest. He wanted to leave, but the wolves blocked the exit, leaving him trapped with no way out. Just then, the pack of wolves suddenly let out howls and scattered in all directions. Some crawled under the bed, while others crouched beneath the tables. Elder Bai was stunned, completely at a loss as to what was happening. Moments later, 2 warriors clad in golden armor burst into the hall, their eyes blazing with fury. One of them pulled out a black rope and swiftly bound Bai Jia. As soon as Bai Jia fell to his knees, he transformed into a fierce tiger, its razor-sharp fangs glinting like blades. One of the warriors drew his sword, preparing to behead the beast, but the other shouted, "Wait! It's not time to kill it yet, we must wait until next April. For now, let's just break its teeth." With that, the warrior grabbed a massive hammer and brought it crashing down onto the tiger's fangs. The tiger let out a deafening roar, its agonized cries echoing through the surrounding mountains. Elder Bai was so terrified that his whole body jolted, then suddenly, he woke up. It had all been a nightmare. Yet his heart was still gripped with fear and confusion. He immediately sent someone to summon Ding, but Ding politely refused to come. With no other choice, Elder Bai wrote down the details of his dream in a letter and sent his second son to deliver it to Bai Jia, urging him to be cautious in his actions. When the second son arrived at Bai Jia's residence, he was shocked to discover that his brother's front teeth were missing. After asking around, he learned that Bai Jia had been drinking heavily, fallen off his horse, and shattered his front teeth. A chill ran down the second son's spine. He quickly calculated the date, and realized that the accident had occurred on the exact same night their father had the dream. The eerie coincidence filled him with even greater unease. Without hesitation, he pulled out the letter from his robes and handed it to Bai Jia. After reading the letter, Bai Jia's face turned pale. But just as quickly, he regained his composure and scoffed, "It's nothing more than coincidence. No need to make such a fuss." At that time, Bai Jia had just been promoted due to bribing his superiors. He had secured a recommendation for further advancement and was basking in his success. Feeling smug and self-satisfied, he dismissed the warning without a second thought. The second son stayed at his brother's residence for a few days. During that time, he witnessed the Yamen officers and constables engaging in all sorts of corrupt activities that harmed the common people. Bribery was rampant. Day and night, people came bearing gifts, hoping to buy favor. He couldn't bear to see his brother continue down such a path. With tears in his eyes, he pleaded with Bai Jia to change his ways. But Bai Jia only responded coldly. "Brother, you live in the countryside and have never been in government service. How could you possibly understand the art of being an official? Promotions and demotions are never decided by the people, they are determined by those with greater power. As long as they approve of you, you are considered a good official. But if you focus on the well-being of the people and spend all your efforts on them, how will you ever win the favor of your superiors?" Hearing this, the second son realized there was no way to change his brother's mind. With a heavy heart, he returned home and told Elder Bai everything. Upon learning of his eldest son's corruption, Elder Bai wept bitterly. But there was nothing he could do. He could only use his own wealth to help the poor as much as possible and pray to the gods every day, hoping that when retribution came for his wayward son, the rest of the family would be spared. The following year, unexpected news arrived. Bai Jia had been recommended for promotion and was now appointed as an official in the Ministry of Personnel. Immediately, crowds of people flocked to Elder Bai's home to offer their congratulations. But Elder Bai felt no joy at all. He merely sighed day after day, lying weakly on his pillow, using illness as an excuse to avoid seeing any guests. Then, not long after, an even more shocking message arrived. Bai Jia had been ambushed by bandits on his journey to the capital. Both he and his servant had been killed, leaving no survivors. Hearing this, Elder Bai pulled himself out of bed and said to his family, "This is the punishment of the spirits." Thankfully, the retribution has fallen only on him. This is the greatest protection our Bai family could have asked for. With that, he burned incense and offered sacrifices, expressing his gratitude to the heavens. Friends and relatives came to console him, believing that the news must have been a mistake. But Elder Bai was convinced it was true. Without hesitation, he began making arrangements for Bai Jia's funeral. The truth, however, was that Bai Jia was not dead. It was a day in April when Bai Jia, having been relieved of his post, set out for the capital. However, as soon as he crossed the county border, he was ambushed by bandits. Without hesitation, Bai Jia handed over all his valuables. But the bandits only sneered. "We didn't come for your money. We came to avenge the people of this county." With that, they struck him down and severed his head. Their leader then turned to Bai Jia's servant and asked, "Which one of you is Si De Cheng?" Si De Cheng was Bai Jia's most trusted aide, a man notorious for his wicked deeds. The remaining attendants exchanged nervous glances before pointing him out. Without mercy, the bandits executed him as well. Accompanying Bai Jia were several minor officials, his trusted aides in extorting money from the common people. This time, he planned to take them to the capital to broaden their horizons. But the bandits identified each one and killed them all. Then, after looting Bai Jia's belongings, they galloped away on horseback. Meanwhile, Bai Jia's soul lay beside the road, watching as a county magistrate-like figure approached. The magistrate asked, "Who was killed here?" One of the men leading the way responded. "It was the county magistrate, Bai Jia." The official sighed. "So it was Elder Bai's son. Elder Bai has done good deeds for so many years. It would be too cruel to let him see his son in such a miserable state. Put his head back on." One of the men picked up Bai Jia's severed head and placed it on his neck. But another shook his head and said, "This man was deceitful in life. How could his head return to its proper place? Just set it on his shoulder." With that, he carelessly placed Bai Jia's head askew on his shoulder. Then, they all departed. Moments later, Bai Jia began to breathe. Miraculously, he was alive again. News of this reached Bai Jia's wife, who rushed to the scene, expecting to retrieve his corpse. But when she saw that he was still breathing, she quickly brought him home. Back at their lodging, she tried feeding him water, and to her relief, he could swallow. Yet, terrified and ashamed, the couple hid inside their rented room, too afraid to step outside. They didn't even have enough money to return to the Bai family estate. It wasn't until 6 months later that Elder Bai finally received more details of his son's fate. He immediately sent his second son to bring Bai Jia and his wife home. But when Elder Bai finally saw his eldest son again, he realized that though Bai Jia had survived, he was no longer the man he used to be. His head now rested sideways on his shoulder, and his eyes could even see his own back. No one could look at him as a normal person anymore. Meanwhile, Elder Bai's nephew, a righteous official, had gained great respect among the people and was promoted to censorate minister that same year. And just like that, every detail of Elder Bai's dream had come true. At the end of the story, the author added this commentary. Officials in this world are like fierce tigers, while their clerks are like ravenous wolves. Such figures are all too common. Even if some officials are not as brutal as tigers, their subordinates will still be as greedy as wolves. And worse yet, some officials are even more savage than tigers. But the most terrifying thing is that these people often fail to see their own future. At least Zhai, after waking up, could see his own back. Perhaps this was a subtle warning from the spirits to the greedy. This reminds me of another story. Li Guangzhou, a scholar from Zuping County, was known for his integrity and fairness when he served as a magistrate. One day, he was handling a case in which a wealthy commoner had been falsely accused. With no other option, the man went to the county office to seek justice. But before he could present his case, the gatekeeper seized the opportunity to extort him, threatening, "Our magistrate demands 200 taels of silver. If you don't pay, you'll surely lose your case." The wealthy man was terrified, but he could only gather 100 taels. The gatekeeper shook his head. "That won't do," he said. Desperate, the man pleaded for mercy. The gatekeeper sighed and said, "It's not that I don't want to help, but I'm afraid the magistrate won't agree. When the trial starts, just watch how I plead on your behalf. Then you'll see for yourself whether I'm deceiving you." Not long after, the trial began. Now, the gatekeeper knew that Li Guangzhou had recently quit smoking. So he walked up to the magistrate and, lowering his voice, asked, "Would you like a smoke?" Li Guangzhou shook his head. At that moment, the gatekeeper turned to the wealthy man and whispered, "Just now, I told the magistrate that you couldn't come up with 200 taels. You saw him shake his head. He won't allow it. Now do you believe me?" Seeing this, the man panicked. He thought, if the magistrate is this firm, then if I don't hand over the full 200 taels, I'll surely lose my case. So, in fear, he agreed to pay exactly as the gatekeeper demanded. The Yamen runner also knew that Li Guangzhou loved tea. So, he stepped forward again and asked, "Would you like some tea?" Li Guangzhou nodded. The runner pretended to go prepare the tea, but in no time, he hurried back to the wealthy man and whispered. The magistrate just nodded in agreement. "You saw it yourself, didn't you?" Shortly after, the case was concluded. Since the wealthy man had done nothing wrong, he was naturally declared innocent. As a result, the Yamen runner not only took the wealthy man's bribe but even demanded an additional token of gratitude. Zhai. Li Guangzhou was famous for being an honest official, yet the people, unaware of the truth, cursed him as a corrupt one. He unknowingly allowed his subordinates to exploit their positions, completely oblivious to their schemes. And officials like him were all too common in the world. That is why those in power must always stay vigilant, never giving their subordinates an opportunity to take advantage of them. Here's another story. Magistrate Yang was a stern and unyielding man. Anyone who committed a crime and provoked his wrath was as good as dead. He particularly despised corrupt clerks and runners, punishing even the smallest transgressions without mercy. Whenever he sat in court with an imposing presence, the clerks below didn't even dare to cough. If any of them made a suggestion, he would not only refuse to listen but would deliberately do the opposite. One day, a city resident committed a serious crime and feared he would be sentenced to death. A Yamen runner approached him, demanding a hefty bribe in exchange for speaking on his behalf. The man hesitated, skeptical of the runner's influence, and said, "If you can really help me, why would I be stingy with the reward?" In the end, they struck a deal. Not long after, Magistrate Yang began the trial. The city resident stood there, anxious yet defiant. Suddenly, the runner shouted, "Why don't you just confess already? If you don't, Magistrate Yang will torture you to death." Hearing this, Magistrate Yang's face darkened. He snapped, "And how do you know I would torture him? Or is it because he refused to pay your bribe, so now you want to frame him?" With that, Magistrate Yang immediately punished the runner and released the city resident. Afterward, out of gratitude, the man decided to give the runner 100 taels of silver as a reward. One must understand, wolves are greedy and cunning. If you lower your guard even slightly, you will fall right into their traps. Worse still, they are experts at studying, manipulating their masters. Such wicked men not only exploit the common folk with ruthless cruelty but also corrupt the very foundations of the government. They destroy an official's virtue, and in the worst cases, even bring ruin to their superiors and their families. If an official cannot recognize these tricks, it is no different from feeding a child to the wolves. Alright. That's all for today's strange tale, Dreaming of Wolves. If you enjoyed it, please like and subscribe. Feel free to leave your comments and share with others. See you again in the next issue.